How are we tonight? This is Adam Buckner. I'm Adam Buckner. At least I think I am. I should hope to be. And this is live training from Unity, as we are doing. It seems to be quite regularly on the Monday evenings, at least here in the UK. So tonight we have another tips and tricks number 3. I'm reading Contab 009. Can someone make a switch or something to toggle between this layout and one similar to Twitch with the comments on the right side? So you can see the video and chat at the same time. That's a very good idea. I am going to give you my, pop that up just so you guys can see. This can bring up, it's going to open up another window. This is a problem with multiple monitors. Let's bring this over. And go to the forum. We're just on the main page. Go to the community. Go to our forum. Got a little shortcut, but I'm not using it. And then down to teaching. And there's free online training. So if you guys want to go ahead and leave me a note, suggestions, comments, criticism, go ahead and do it there, including the page. If you have problems with that page layout, I can see if I can have it changed. So this is a great place to put comments and criticisms. If you have classes you want to see us working on, if you have the subjects you want covered, if you find that you want to change on the format, if there's something that's wrong or there's something that's good, I always like to have people telling me that they like what they're seeing, and if they if they don't like what they're seeing, I'm going to try to fix it. So that's the place to do it. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about little tips and tricks, little things that I thought people may have missed, a kind of a smorgasbord of little information. Today we're going to start off in the inspector. There's some stuff I want to talk about in the inspector, and you may or may not know these things. The first thing I want to talk about is if we have a game object. I'm just going to create a new game object here. Let's just create a cube. 3D object, create a cube. So we've got a cube. Let's move them off our little player. I'm not necessarily playing Nightmares today. I just have that up for us to look at. So I've got a little cube there. And if we're looking at the components in the inspector, the components on this game object, I want to talk about the header bar, where we've got our transform, cube, box collider, mesh collider. Let's try that again. So where we have our transform, our cube as a mesh filter, our box collider, and our mesh renderer. So we're seeing the name or the type of the component. And then we have this little book. And I'm going to talk about the book. A lot of people seem to not know what it does and ignores it a lot. It simply takes us directly to the component reference, to our reference manual. So if you see a component that you have on the inspector and you wonder either how do I use this or what's the best way to use it, you can click on the book and you're going to get that particular component. And also pay attention to the fact that you can switch to scripting. So if you want to script to that component and you're here in the editor, you can then say, even though I want to script to it, you can click on the book, you'll get the manual, then you can switch to scripting, and you have the scripting reference for that particular component. And what's right next to it? What's next to that little book? A little tiny gear menu. This is our context-sensitive menu. And the context-sensitive menu is really useful. There's 2 ways that we can access this. We can either click on the gear itself, brings up the gear menu. Also, we can control or command click on the title bar, so on the name of the component, and we get the same context menu that pops up. So what can we do with this? Well, there's some general functionality that we have on all of these. We can reset the component. Move front to back, move to front, move to back. These are for the UI. So if we have a new UI element, so bring up the HUD canvas, please. And we have our health slider. Let's bring that up. And let me go into 2D mode since we're dealing quickly with the UI. And we want this to be either in front of or in back of something. We can use that to move in the front or move in the back. And you can see that it's changing our position in the canvas, and that's because the position in the canvas determines the rendering order. And we always start to render at the top as the back, and as we move down, we go further and further forward. So we can quickly use that contextual menu to pop it to the front. So as you can see, we're adjusting using the context-sensitive menu to move those UI items around, and it only is available on UI items, and also they're only available on the rect transform, because the components themselves, it's irrelevant. It's the rect transform you need to move to the front to the back. So let's just make sure we've got that where it was. And what else can we do with this? We can remove the component. So if we add a component, let me show you also a quick way to add a component. Hold down the Shift and the Command or Control and A, and that brings up the component. We can then quickly create something like a rigid body by typing RI. And if we want something else, space 2, and we've got the rigid body 2D, and hit return, it's been attached. So we can very quickly add components without ever getting our hands off the keyboard. So we can do that using the keyboard entirely with Shift Command or Shift Control A. Then we can just do a quick type, and if we need, we can do, you don't have to type the whole word RI for rigid body. RIB will get you rigid body as well. And then hit return and it's attached. If we want to remove it, we can go to the context sensitive gear menu and simply remove that component. Now, the other thing that's kind of fun about this is you can move the components up and down now. I'm a fan of making sure that everything in my game is laid out the same way. So if I've got 2 or 3 similar components, 2 or 3 similar game objects, I want to have my components on those game objects in the same order, so that when I quickly scan over to the inspector, I know where to find my material. And so if I've built something differently and the rigid body came on later and it's at the bottom, whereas on another similar game object it's at the top, I would like to arrange that. I'd like to rearrange them so they're the same, and I can do that by moving up and moving down. So I can move the components inside the inspector by moving them up and moving them down with that context-sensitive gear menu. We can also copy components. So if I've got something like, let's take our cube. Where's my cube there? Let's close down the HUD canvas and take a look at our cube here. Go out of 2D mode, back into 3D mode. Boop. And so I have something I like. Let's just say it's scale. And I have another cube. And that's somewhere else. Yep. It's frame selected on that one. It's frame selected on both of these. So I've selected both. F for frame selected. They're both there in the center. And I want to change that scale. I can copy the component, and I can paste the component values. So I'm pasting the component values, and that's going to move the positions. It's going to copy and paste all of it, the position, the rotation, and the scale. Probably not the best example I could have come up with, since I really only wanted to paste scale. So you can copy and paste values. That's probably more valuable if you have something like a light or some other more complicated component where you can copy those, copy and paste those, that component value. The other thing that you can do if we had a demo script, let me just try this. Let's just create a new C# script, and let's just call this our demo script. It's another silly example. So if you have it on 1, whatever that component is, in this particular case it's the demo script, you can copy that component, and then you can click on another game object, and you can go ahead and paste that component as new, and it will pop on. And this will be true of any particular component that we have. We can add that component. Remember when I said the shortcut Shift Command or Shift Control A? That brings it up, and we could put on a light. And we could change the color value of that light. Let's make it red. And we want to add a light onto the other cube. We can copy that component. We can paste it onto the other cube. Paste component as new, as opposed to paste the value. So now I've got that component I've copied and pasted it onto another object. Sorry, I'm trying to catch up. I realize, guys, you guys are chatting. I'm seeing that Drexlauder is saying strg plus D is a much easier way, or not. You're talking about Control or Command D for duplicating. Yeah, that's what I'm guessing. If you're talking about duplicating an entire object, then you can duplicate the entire object. We're talking about copying and pasting specific components off of one game object and pasting just the component onto another. Because if I was to duplicate, and I select my cube, whoops, let's go back, please. If I was to take my cube and then I was to duplicate with Command D, I've got a completely new cube. And sometimes I don't want the cube, I just want a component. So I can copy and paste those components alone from one to another. I'm using simple examples here because I don't want to spend too much time making something that is too complicated. But that's the basic idea. Yes, direct shell editor. I was guessing that strg was control, but if you see the basic idea, the difference that I'm looking at is rather than duplicating the entire game object, I'm talking about simply copying and pasting a single component, which occasionally is useful. I mean, we could all probably think of some better examples than this, but cubes are what I've got today. Now you can customize these. There's a couple of ways that you can customize these context-sensitive menus. And one of them is by manipulating this reset value. If you hit reset, it's going to reset the component based on whatever its starting state was. So if it's a default Unity component, it's going to be reset to that same value when you create it. I mean, it's going to give us a light which has got a range of 10, and the color is going to be white. So if I change all of this stuff around and I hit reset, this is going to be reset back to that default. But what about my demo script? Well, let's go ahead and quickly edit that demo script. So I've got this demo script and I create some variables. I've got an int public. So in this case, a public int, my int, and a public float, my float. And I could initialize these. In one sense, this is very similar to just simply initializing them here, you know, equals 5 and equals 5.5f. But if I left these blank, or I wanted to override these, I could create a reset function. Learn to spell, void reset. And I could then say my int equals 5 and my float equals 5.5f. I'm a little bit worried. Oh, there's a new in there. That was not meant to be there. That was a... Let me just pick some different numbers so we can make sure that this isn't being, you know, held up by something. So now this reset function is going to happen in two cases. Let's save that. It's gonna happen when you click the reset button. So when we go back to our cube, when it compiles, oh, what have I done wrong? Oh, semicolon. So yeah, semicolon there. So we've got my float, my int, and if I now hit reset, you can see it resets to those values. Also, if you don't have I'm going to remove this one, remove the component, and now I'm going to add that component on again. And you can see it's using those default values. So reset, you can customize the reset function on your scripts by simply writing a small void function called reset, and you can manipulate whatever of your values in that reset. That function will be called the first time you apply the script and whenever you hit the reset button. That's an interesting question, Contab. I mean, we can stop and talk about it. I mean, that's what these are about. It really depends upon how, and yes, I'm using 4.6 because I've got the UI involved, because there's some things I wanted to show, including that move forward and move back, and I'm somewhat future-proofing us for imminent changes in both 4.6 being released as a final and moving into 5. Now, as Dreckschlauder was just mentioned, it really part of it depends upon the architecture of your game. It is very hard to script everything in one script. It gets very, very large if you try to script everything in one script, and it's kind of hard to maneuver. There are times when it is frustrating if you have every single small element broken out into another script, and then you have to reference that script and make sure that your scripts are communicating properly. But in general, the way that Unity works, it's better to have small componentized scripts that are not necessarily dependent on each other, so that you can keep your functionality limited, so each script does only one thing and does only one thing very well and doesn't necessarily need to know what other people are doing. A lot like object-oriented scripting, where each object wants to be self-contained, where each component needs to be self-contained, and then you can reuse that component. The typical example that I use of that is writing one script that is a motor for your characters and your vehicles for moving around in the scene. And that motor can be driven by different controllers, whether it's a NavMesh AI, whether it's a player, and so that you're moving your characters around is in one script, and then what's controlling it is another script. So two different components. And I would suggest, try to use as many small scripts as you can up to the limit of being ridiculous, because each script needs to do one thing, but it needs to do it well, so it needs enough functions in it to do it well. So back to what we're talking about. The other way that we can customize our context-sensitive menus is with an attribute. We can set up a script, and we can put an attribute in that script, and that attribute can completely modify our context-sensitive menu. So we've got our little cube here. Let's go back to our scene, please. So we've got our cube. Let me just reset that. And let's bring it up by half a unit. I just want it resting on the ground. And there, I'm going to delete our other cube, so we just have one cube. And then frame selected on the cube. So there's our cube. And I'm probably going to remove that light as well for now. Let's just remove that light. So this context-sensitive gear menu is what I'm going to try to modify. And I'm going to do it with our wonderful demo script. So I'm going to bring that back into the editor. And what we're going to do here is going to need a new namespace. When we're dealing with things in the editor, most of that is hiding under a namespace called Unity Editor. So for what I'm about to do, we're going to need to have Unity Editor as a namespace at the top. And then I'm going to create a little menu item that's just going to do something, a context-sensitive menu item. And let's do it with menu items. So we create square brackets, attributes. We can talk about attributes a little bit further on, see how far we can get today. Menu item. And so that's the attribute is menu item. And then inside the attribute, we can call this like a function. We have arguments we can send in. And the argument here is a string. And in this particular case, and I'll show you a different way to use menu item, we want to adjust the context menu. So we need to write in context. And then let's say we want to adjust our rigid body. And what we want to do is, I don't know, double the mass. Something like that. Something that we want to do regularly, that we want to have an identify, that we can, something that we can, we want to do regularly, why we would want to have this in the context menu. So I'm sort of pulling that one out of my back pocket. Now, the setup here we have is we have to have the word menu item. We then have to have the word context. And then we need to have a type or our component name. And then we need to have our ID from that we're going to use, that's going to be what the context menu displays is going to be the ID name is going to be the last bit. And so that looks like designed like a path. So that's the way we do it, context, type, and then ID name, because I want to directly adjust the context of my my rigid body when I do that. And then this has to be static. This is a static function, static void, and then we need to have a name. So let's call this name double mass. And then we want to take in as a parameter a menu command. And let's just call that command. And now we can do something with this. And this is the object, where the command is going to give us more information, including the object that comes in. So we can say we want to find our rigid body now. And let's just call this the body, rigid body, RB. What do you say, RB? RB sounds good to me. And then we need to cast for it, rigid body. And because it's coming in as a generic object, so we need to say it needs to be a rigid body, and then we want our command.context. So that's the context menu that we're talking about. The context is the rigid body that we're clicking on. And then we can just say our rigid body.mass is going to be equal to our rigid body.mass times 2. So save that, and we can come back to Unity and hope that we haven't made any obvious bonehead mistakes. Woohoo, look at that. So we've got our cube. Let's do, again, Shift Control A. Let's add a rigid body, and then look at our context menu, and we now have double mass down here. Boop, and we can double our mass. So we've made a little shortcut into our context menu. And so if there's something that we want to do in our game, we want to do it all the time, and we want it quickly accessible in the context menu, we can just go ahead and change that menu item by using that keyword context, rigid body, which is identifying the type, and then just the name of whatever we want to see in that context menu. Now, notice we don't get that if it's not a rigid body. So if you were to suddenly look in scripting reference, and another shortcut, I showed you how to do the shortcut to get to the scripting reference by hitting onto the book. It takes us to the component reference, then we can switch to scripting. We can also get that inside our scripts. So if we were to write something like context menu, there we go, context menu, and we'll see that there's two more items, context menu and context menu attribute, that aren't related to what we've just done. What we've just done is used the menu item attribute. Well, what are these other two things? If we've just manipulated the context menu by using the menu item, then what is context menu and what's... no, I'm not going to complete, am I? Well, I'll go back to here. Try it again. What's context menu and context menu attribute? Well, we can look them up in in scripting. What we can do with that is we can highlight whatever we want to find out in the scripting reference when we're in monodevelop, and hold down the command or the control key and then the single quote key, and in another window we get our scripting reference. And so there's context menu. Now the context menu will allow us to add something to the context menu of the particular script. Very similar to that sort of global one that we just did, but this is not using static. This is simply making a class that we can do something with directly to our script when it's attached. A little bit more simple than, and it's using Unity Engine, so we don't need the editor, and it's for just that script rather than manipulating. Let me stop and try again, because this is just crap. What I'm saying is that when we're using the menu item context, we're trying to write a static function that's going to work on potentially other component types rather than just this script. We're writing an editor script to work on other objects, whereas this is particularly for writing something for this script, and it needs to be instantiated, and it's not a static script. So let's see this in action. So what we can do to change the context menu, we can, let's just do it simply. Let's just knock this one out so we don't see it. Oops, not what I wanted to do. There we go. And knock that one out, I believe, because then we can see what we're doing. And we can write our context menu. context menu. And let me get rid of these other ones that we're using. Sorry, just for showing you how to get to the documentation. So this is the one we're actually going to work on, context menu. So let's write context menu and then just say item added to context menu. So we can see this. So this is just the label. So we just have a simple label of what this is, and it'll call the next function. And so let's just say void test context menu. Something simple. And then let's just throw something in the log, debug.log, just to prove that it works. Tested context menu. How about context menu? And now, if we come back to Unity, we can see that we have got an item added to the context menu. We click on it, and it puts down into the debug.log. It executes that function and logs that particular line. Now, what's this other one, though? Context menu item attribute. This one's a little bit deceptive because they got very similar names, and I think that it's one of those problems when you're dealing with so many bits of an API that all do similar but different things, coming up with a name that makes sense. This one is for making context menus attached to specific fields like your variables. And so I'm not attaching it to a function. I'm going to attach this to a variable during the declaration phase. And so I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say my context menu item, and then let's just call this let's actually set let's set a string. It's a little bit easier to see. So let's actually, I'm going to change this to let's call this set my string. Oops, habit, set my string. So I've created a context menu item called set my string, and I'm going to create a public string my string. It needs to be slightly more complicated than this, though. We are actually calling a function with this. So this needs two arguments. It needs to have the name, set my string, and the function that we're going to call. So let's create something called set string. And then down here, we can have our void set string. And what are we going to set? Let's just call it my string. My string equals olive oil. How about that? And that's not a misspelling. That's simply a cartoon character. So we've got that. Save that. And we come back to Unity. And when we look at our demo script, I can hold down the control key and get a context-sensitive menu for that field. It's not on the float, it's not on the int, but I can get it on the string. And it's not in the field either. I'm getting my cut, copy, and paste there. It's on the string title, on the title of the variable. I can set that, and you can see that's set to olive oil. It's Dreckschlauder, it's sugar. It's little bits of things that you may find that when you're editing, especially you're editing a complicated game, that all of these things may turn out to be useful for whatever reason. I can imagine myself in a situation where I'm testing something and I need to reset it, so I can quickly throw an attribute in there and I can reset my particular field, or I'm testing something and I want to reset that particular instance of the script. It's mostly I'm sort of looking at things that people don't know about. Small things that I thought might be useful. Throw it out there. It may not be useful to 84,584 of us, but if one of us that's watched this channel does find it useful, then I'm happy. So we've seen that the context menu adds context to a menu item on that particular script, that context menu item attribute adds context menu to a particular field. Menu item, we've been able to use that to add functions to menus in the editor, including that component, so we adjusted the rigid body. But we can also use that menu item to add items just to the main menu toolbar. And so we can do things like this, where back to our demo script, we can make something that has a context menu here, another menu item. Ooh, that worries me. I always hate it when I don't get proper code completion. It makes me worried I've done something wrong. So let's do our menu. So let's just say we make a tools menu. So just by saying, and it's a string, sorry. So let's make a tools menu. So this is a string, just a single string value. And then in that tools menu, we want to have something that's called, I don't know, set mass. I'm just inventing here, just to show you how this works. Close that off with a square bracket, and then, and this is static as well, and this will need to use, oh, that's why I'm not using my editor. I turned that off. We're not going to find menu item unless I have my Unity editor namespace. So there's my menu item exactly. So that's my problem. Please enlarge the text. How's that? Ace. So we're using that namespace, Unity editor. It's got to be a static function. Let's just call this set mass. And then we can say a rigid body, my rigid body, or RB. It's what we used before, rigid body RB equals, and then we have to cast for it again, rigid body, our selection. And this is worth looking up in the docs, selection.activeObject. So I'm grabbing the active object that we have selected, and then I want to say the RB.mass equals 100F or something like that. Now, if we return to Unity and everything works right, we've got a tools menu. And I can grab something in my game, and I can set its mass. Or I should be able to. It doesn't seem to be working. As we can see, this didn't work, and we moved on. What I did wrong was use selection.activeObject, which in this case can get non-modifiable objects and doesn't find the rigid body component. It is recommended to use selection.activeTransform, and then from the transform, find the rigid body with a get component. For more information on selection, please see the information linked below. The other thing you can do is you can branch it, so you can create more complicated tool sets. And that may have been a silly example because I'm not grabbing that rigid body directly. I would have thought that that had worked, but obviously isn't. So there, anyway, so what I wanted to show you is that you can branch your tool sets. Maybe I need to double check how I do that, the selection active object. I thought I was able to do that. I thought I tested that this morning, but I maybe didn't. So anyways, we can see that we can create whatever sets of tools we want and whatever branch. So we can have multiple items, multiple menu items that do different things. I'm debating. Shall I write you guys a little script? This may take a second, but it may also be useful. I was going to try to use a good use case. So let me quickly bang out a script that may be useful. I'm going to leave it here, but I'll include it on the website as well when we're done. Just to show you the different ways that you can do stuff with menu item. Menu item. Why would you want to do something like this? Well, because of this. Tools. Transform. Tools. Align with, let's do this in, we can have spaces in this. Align with ground. Close that off. And so what I want to do is write a very quick static function called align with ground. That will align whatever object we touch onto the ground, or whatever is below it, not necessarily onto the ground, but whatever is below it. So what do we want to do is we want to say, take a group of transforms. Transform collection, transform array, and let's just call these transforms. And that's going to be equal to our selection, which I talked about in the previous, though not particularly working function, called selection transforms. And then I want to say, for each transform, my transform, in transforms, what do I want to do with these guys? Well, I want to create a raycast hit. Let's just call that hit. And then we want to say if our physics raycast from, what did I call it? My transform dot position. We want to go minus vector 3 up. I suppose we could use vector 3 dot down now. At one point that was a no-no. And then we want to have an out hit. So we've got our hit there. Give it some breathing room there on the bottom. And then we find vector 3 as a target position, called target position. And that target position is going to be equal to our hit point. And then if my transform dot game object dot get component mesh filter. If we grab a mesh filter and it's not null, then let's do something else. We want to take our bounds. We want to create some bounds. And these are bounds. Just call them bounds. Let's make our bounds called bounds. So we go bounding across this script. And it's equal to my transform, game object, get component. Oh, come on. Get component. What component do we want? We want our mesh filter. Mesh filter, please. And we want to get the shared mesh. And we want to get its bounds. A little bit complicated, but we're basically grabbing the bounds of my transform, so we can use that to adjust our target position. We want to say our target position, y, so how far up and down our target position is, plus equals, so we've hit our hit point is the target position, and then we want to, our target position dot y, excuse me, I bumped that out, plus equals the bounds extents y. So basically we want to grab the mesh filter of the game object that we're casting the ray from, because we're going to be casting from the center point. We want to be grabbing the bounds of our, so in this particular case it's going to be a cube, the bounds of our cube. So we're going to take the distance between the center point and the edge and add that to the target position so that we rest on top of it rather than putting our center point at our hit point. So when that's done, we say our transform position, my transform, excuse me, position is equal to the target position, which has now been adjusted for our depth. And then we want to say our vector 3, create a new temporary vector 3 called target rotation. And that's going to be equal to a new vector 3. And it's going to be created out of our hit.normal.x. So that's our x value. It's going to be the rotation of the hit's normal x value. And then our y value is actually going to be from the transform, from my transform, Euler angles dot y. And the reason for this is we don't want to rotate our game object to match the rotation of the thing that we're touching. And then we want the Z to be the hit.normal .z. So we're taking that off of the normal of the hit point that we get. And then our transform, my transform dot Euler angles equals target rotation. Only if I can spell rotation. There we go. Relatively, that's why I was sort of debating whether it's a relatively long script for this type of thing. But it's kind of fun when you see what it does. So pending we don't have any major bonehead errors. And an unexpected symbol, what have I done? Oh, double close bracket. Okay. Another silly error. Oh, get type. That was me. Get component Russian. Woohoo! Done! Now, if we look at our scene, and we've got a cube that's just up here somewhere, and we want that positioned directly on the thing below us. Let's back out a little bit. We can now go to our tools, our transform tools, and align with ground. Now, if this was over some other object, frame selected. One more time. There we go. I'm not sure what the colliders are doing, but we can then take that tools, transform tools, align with ground. Oh, and I missed. So there must not be a collider on. Oh, I just missed the box. So it's raycast off that. And what it is, it raycast next to it. So let's move it out a little bit further. Tools, transform tools, align with ground. Boom, and it lands on top of that object. So why do we want to be able to? Well, it's on top of the box collider. Sorry that the box collider is not aligned with the object. That's not so. But you get the idea. So just some quick fun things to do with context-sensitive menus and attributes. There are some additional attributes that are also worth looking at, which we don't necessarily need to get into in detail, but I wouldn't mind mentioning at this point. There's hide in inspector. Let's quickly look at these guys. So if you want something, if you have something that you need public, I need to have my int public, but I don't want to see it in the inspector. So when I'm looking at my demo script and I've got my int and I want that public, I need it public from my architecture. I don't want to be able to change it in the inspector. I don't want one of the other guys on my team to bump it when they're in the editor. I can simply say, using an attribute, hide in an inspector. Hide in inspector. And now when we come back to our game, it's as if it wasn't there. It's still there. It's still public. We just can't see it. And one of the other things that's fun is range. So we can have a range. And with the range attribute, you can set the values as arguments, a float min and a float max. So we could say we want this particular float, or my float, to go from 2 to 5, or whatever you want. And we can save that. And this is an attribute. And when we come back to Unity, we can see, or we should be able to see, there we go. It's now, we've got a slider, and it's limited from 5 to 2. There are also some other ones. There's a system serializable, serialized field, and execute and edit mode. They're all useful to know. When you're writing a custom class, you can use system serializable. Now, we don't necessarily need to go into this one in particular. We cover this in communicating between game objects and scripts. We also have touched on this in tips and tricks earlier. So system serializable. So if you've got a custom class, oh heck, I'll just show it because I'm already here. If you have a public class, my class, and it has some stuff in it. Public int my other int public prefab utility my bottom public float my other float. If we don't have system serializable, it's going to be ignored by. We need an instance of this as well. Excuse me, just trying to finish up today. My public my class my class. We won't see this after it compiles. So we're looking at the little spinny down here where it's compiling. That's down in the corner. It's compiled and we don't see the instance of this class. If we force it to be serialized by Unity, because Unity will only show serialized classes, we can then see it in Unity and it'll have it turned down. So we can see those, so we need to force things to be serialized. Also, Unity will not automatically serialize private private fields. My private float. And if you discover that you need to have that serialized for whatever reason using Unity Serializer, you can use serialize field. And even though it's private, it will go ahead and force the serialization of that particular field. And I would say the last one is execute in edit mode, but I don't really have a very good way of showing that. But if essentially on GUI update and a number of functions that are called regularly when Unity is running are not called at edit time. And if you find out that you're doing some testing with your game or you want to debug or you want to see your on GUI UI, which we don't need to see that very much any longer, you would make that class, and it's on the class level, not on the function level. You would ask it to execute in edit mode. And all of the updates and things like that would execute in edit mode. But anyway, it's been an hour. Yes, we could talk about adding shortcut hotkeys. Yes, you can. If you're adding contextual menus using the menu items here, you can also... I can't remember the syntax. I'm going to have to look this up in the documentation. But that's the wonderful thing about command plus single quote. It'll tell you. Menu item. So the characters are the % for control or command, # for shift, and for alt. And the syntax for this is... Oh, just space and then the modifier. Okay, so put the transform on the ground, space, Command T, so that would be T. Save that. So I've just added the % and T. Come back to Unity and Tools. Come on, you can do it. Tools, transform. You can now see it's got Command T there. So now we can just hit Command T, bonk, onto the ground. So, been an hour. So, any questions? Let's throw this over to Q&A. Maxime says, can we copy more than one component in one action? At this point, no, but it is on the roadmap because it would be great to be able to copy or drag and drop a number of these things. With this context-sensitive menu, it's definitely on the roadmap to both drag to reorder components on the inspector and also to drag copies of components from one game object to another, but it hasn't been implemented at this point. Oboe shape, just a wee one for you. Frame selecting. You can double tap F, then play the game, and the object you've selected stays in view. Yes, that's true. Absolutely fantastic. Found that handy when zoomed into an object and wanted to watch it more closely to see what is happening. Yes, that is absolutely true. You can double tap frame selected, and in edit time you'll see it. Let me just do that. Let's frame selected, double tap. It's got a rigid body on it. Good, so it should fall. Wow, I'm not going to get this right. And it's also pink. Mikhailonatuk. Yuck. Sorry about that. I just butchered your name. How to sort items in the hierarchy A to B. You can do that with a script. That was the standard hierarchy sort until about 4.5, and we now use the hierarchy sorting order for the order in which things render, especially when using canvases. But there is a script that you can find in, I believe it's the sample package, but it could be the project that comes with the UI. So look at the 4.6. Let me just show you rather than tell you. That's what we're here for, right? Let me show you. So let's go to the forum. Forum. We've got our developer preview of 4.6 beta going on. And I believe we have the UI example project here. And so copy this and paste. There you go. And in the example project, you should find a script that you can enable to sort your hierarchy alphabetically. Broofy, is there a similar method for adding buttons to specific scripts? Broofy, one of the things I have on my roadmap to teach is custom inspectors, what's it called? Drawers, custom drawers. That's wrong. It's not component drawers, it's not custom drawers. Come on, what is it? Property drawers, yes. Now, this is an older blog, but that basically describes it, but this is one of the ways that you can do it. Lestricon, can you assign hotkeys to these types of scripts? Yes, you can. The hotkeys are described, I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about the menu items. Oh, crackers. In a different window again. And so the best thing I can do is show you this list because it's here. So there's the documentation there, and here is the list. Unity Games R Us. I'm wanting to make cards in a game. Can I just add a rect transform to a game object and then place the text component upon it? Yeah, you can. I mean, the best thing I would do if I wanted to make something that was like a card, it needs to be on a canvas, and I happen to have my HUD canvas here. I would create an image, so a UI image, frame selected on that, and go into 2D mode because we're in UI. And I'd pick my size, get a sprite. So let me see if we've got some art here. Anything of any value, demo art, image, card, image, and I can grab. Let's just pretend that this is a card. You've got round cards today. Set native size. So that's now set to the size of my artwork, frame selected. I want it to go into the middle, so I'm going to hold down the Shift and the Alt key and pop it to the center, F for frame selected, and there it is in the middle of my game. This would need to look like cards. You'd want some additional logic to move them around so that they move around your game. And move the whole object in code to move them around, or following a drag. But yeah, I would do, I mean, unless you need to see the cards flip over in 3D space, in which case you're no longer in 2D, but as long as you're dealing with 2D space, you can just make your cards and make a graphic, one for each card, or depending upon how you work it, you could swap out the sprite, but you need sprites for each card, and move them around the game board based on their pivot and transform. Yes, and if you want another text component, the other thing you can do is you can nest these. So click on your game object, and then you create a new, been a long day, create a new text object as a child, and then we've got our label text, you know, whatever you want to call it. And then I'm going to change, is it main assets fonts? Change this to luckiest guy, just so we can see it. Luckiest guy. 25, and let's change it from gray to white. So there's our label text. And then you can move that main image around, and you can see that the label text as a child will move with it. Shadow. And outline. Might be able to see it a little better. Oh, I just put those on the wrong one. Here we can do copy component. Here's a good use of copy component. Paste component is new. I could probably just do this by adding it directly, but, copy this component. Paste component is new. Now it's on the text, and I can delete these guys. Context-sensitive gear menu. That's a lesson for tonight. There we go. In 4.6, could I make a health bar be a specific length that represents 100% of the player's health, not 100 pixels? Yes, that's what we've done here. Specifically, Slateboard, this is a value. If we look at the image, let's look at this guy, specifically it's the ammo slider. Where's your health slider? There's the health slider. And the health slider is a slider bar, and it has a value of 1 to 100. And you can see how as I change that, let me frame select it on this. As I change the value of the slider bar, it changes the value of what we're using for health bar. And I can reposition this to being much bigger. And it still works as a percentage. Now, if you wanted to use something more complicated and roll your own and not use the slider as a health bar, then you would just use a percentage of its width. Was it 100% of its width? Is it 50% of its width? So what's its width? So to a certain point, you're manipulating. Oh, that's height. That's the wrong one. It's the width. You'd be manipulating your graphic by simply dividing it by a percentage. Distu99, can you, I never tried, but can you rotate a canvas in 3D like a card flip? You could, actually. It's thin. You need a world space canvas. I think that if you try to flip a normal canvas, it's just going to be flat. You can't affect the rect transform of overlay canvases. Screen space canvases, so you need to be in world space to do that, and then you can start to rotate your canvas in 3D space. But you need a world space camera, or world space canvas to be able to do that. Current shaders will still work in 5, yes, but you get the advantage of physically based shading as well. Chewy, the best one. Can we change the slider to have another shape, such as a circle, for example? Not directly. It's really not what it's meant for, but you can probably get into using masks. And if you want to, you can look up mask and how to use it on the live training site. Just because it's well described there, and it would take us a couple of minutes just to go through how to use a mask, and it's already done. So go ahead and watch that, and you'll understand how to mask things. And then with mask, you can then mask off your round. Use a round mask, and then you'll be able to see your health bar inside that. Flawless. When I've made my 3D models and characters and they're all done, should I be making my animations I need in Blender or some other software, or Unity? Unity has very simple animation tools, and they're for animating transforms. They're for animating things like you can make a door open. There's a lot of in-game stuff that you can animate, like lights, the intensity of a light, size of your UI images. But for doing character animation, I would suggest that you either use motion capture, and there is some motion capture up on the asset store, or that you use a proper 3D character animating package, Blender, Max, Maya, and do your animations keyframed in one of those packages, and then import them. And to be honest, I know how to animate. I'm not the greatest animator. I think I wouldn't want to use my own animations, and so I would be looking at motion capture libraries. And Mechanim works very well with motion capture libraries, and will save you a lot of the hassles of trying to learn how to keyframe animate your own characters, unless there's something special and unique you need to do. All right, well, I'm going to wrap up then. And definitely thank you for coming, and I hope this was interesting, and I'll try to make some more tips and tricks when I get the chance. And I'll talk at you guys later.